Today we're getting under the hood with Tracy Otsuka, a JD, LLM, AACC, ACC, and a certified ADHD coach and the host of the ADHD for Smartass Women podcast. Her book of the same name with HarperCollins, William Morrow, is an Amazon Editor's Top 20 Best Nonfiction Book of 2024 recipient. Over the past decade, she has empowered thousands of clients, from doctors and therapists to C-suite executives and entrepreneurs, to see their neurodivergence as a strength, not a weakness. Leveraging her analytical skills from her time as a lead counsel at the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, she helps clients boost productivity, improve finances, save relationships, and live happier lives. Tracy's expertise and experience as an adult living with ADHD regularly sought out by top-tier media including Bloomberg, CBS Mornings, ABC News Live, Forbes Incorporated, Prevention, Attitude Magazine, and the Gold Digger podcast. When she's not sharing her thought leadership around ADHD on other platforms, she hosts her own podcast, which ranks number one in its category and has over 7 million downloads across 160 countries. She also moderates a Facebook group with over 100,000 members. Married mother of two, Tracy lives in Sonoma County outside of San Francisco. Wow. Welcome, Tracy.
Well, thank you. I'm so delighted to be here.
I'm so excited to be getting under the hood with you today. It's season 4, Women's March for Mental Wellness, and I would love to get going.
Sounds like a plan.
I love this question, and I'm really intrigued as it relates to you. What was that inflection point or that moment of inspiration that got you on this journey into mental health and wellness?
It was my son, and I think that happens for so many of us. My son loved school. He loved life. In fact, his kindergarten teacher said he was the most joyful child she'd ever met, the kind of kid that every day he was just so delighted to learn. But starting in 4th grade, he all of a sudden started to struggle. And he was consistently inconsistent. So what that meant is he would get A's and C's and D's and sometimes worse in the same subject in the same week. And so his teachers and, we did as well as his parents thought, what the heck is going on? He must not be trying hard enough. He must not care. This was, I didn't think this, but I'm sure his teachers thought, oh, character flaw, moral failing. Like, what is wrong with this kid? He's clearly so qualified and has so much aptitude, but he's just not applying himself. And so for about 3 years, we took him from one place to another. The occupational therapist, we had some testing done. He had tutors, he had all the support, but nobody could really figure out what was going on. And so finally, and he would have these moments where he would do these brilliant things, like he got himself a leadership scholarship for 5th grade on his own. He filled out the application in pencil on his own. And he had been going to a Catholic school. When he got the scholarship, my daughter was graduating from 8th grade. And I remember, and she was at a Catholic school too, at the same Catholic school. And he sat down in the pew. We gave him the letter that said he had received the leadership scholarship. And he looked at my dad. He looked at my husband and my dad, was that a Freudian slip? He looked at my husband and he said, oh my gosh, but what am I going to do? I'm a Catholic learner, like just, things like that. So he would have these moments where he would achieve things that most kids his age, don't. And then other times where he could not get out of his own way. And so finally, he ended up going to this school. It was a country day school. What they told us is they taught to interest. And so we thought, okay, that's what would work for him. Well, he went there 5th grade, did great. 6th grade, he started getting bored again. And it was really chaotic compared to the Catholic school, which was really structured. And so we ended up, he went through 5th grade, came back to us at 6th grade and said, I don't want to go here anymore. I want to go back to the Catholic school because I need the structure. And the principal was so irate and upset with him. Instead of sitting down with him and finding out, well, what was his issue with the school. He just kept trying to sell him. And so Marcus was like, nope, I'm going back. So that is the summer we finally had him tested. And he was tested and received a diagnosis of ADHD. And I could have literally fallen off my chair because I didn't know what ADHD was. I thought ADHD meant that you're all over the place, you're not very smart, and you're a problem. And I wouldn't have said that was my son at all. And so we went to a psychologist who came highly recommended in our community as the expert on ADHD to try to understand what ADHD was even about. She had 3 meetings with one was with our family, one was just with my son, and one was with my husband and me. She came back and she told us that our job as his parents was to reduce his expectations because he was far too ambitious, I guess, for her liking. And she thought, he's going to be disappointed. You might as well pull him down now so he's not disappointed. And I remember just thinking, why would anybody say that to any child or to the parents of any child? I don't care if that child was intellectually disabled. I mean, clearly, if the expectation is up here and let's say they come a little bit under it, okay. But if the expectation is down here and they come under it, like, why would you do that? So I started to do the research. And the more I researched, I discovered that there was a lot of pathology around ADHD and, everybody focused on the weaknesses, but there were a few medical professionals that actually could see that, and they all had ADHD, by the way. They could see that, yeah, there were some challenges, but under the hood of every single one of those challenges were so many strengths. And so I started to study those strengths. And I started to kind of counsel Marcus. And lo and behold, 8 months later, it took me 8 months to figure out, oh my gosh, he got his ADHD from me. I didn't even understand that ADHD was highly genetic. And so, the chances that, if he had ADHD, the chances that one of us, Rich or myself had ADHD was really, really strong. And so there were two things that got me to understand that, oh my gosh, he got his ADHD from me. And one of them is that drivenness is a form of hyperactivity. And I was nothing if not driven. I didn't struggle in school like Marcus, but I had to work harder than everybody else. But when it came to entrepreneurial ventures, I was always out there front and center from the time I was 8 years old, trying to build businesses and sometimes I was successful at building those businesses, but that was my fun. It wasn't playing with stuff like normal kids. No. I remember literally the first thing that I ever remember buying were remember those little voucher things that had like they were invoices and they had carbon paper underneath them. And when you used to go to the store, they would write out like whatever you bought, right, on those little vouchers. That was the first thing that I ever remember buying. The second thing was one of the real strengths, especially for women with ADHD, is often interpersonal intuition. And what that means is you can walk into a room and no one even has to say anything. And it's almost like you can read the energy. The mood people are in, what's going on, we're really, really good at that. And if you think about it, if you can't always rely on your brain, that your brain is going to show up and perform for you, you hone other skills. And one of those skills is your intuition. And so sometimes we don't even know why the answer is X. We feel it. But because we can't show how we got to that answer, especially in school, we struggle. So that was a really long-winded explanation. One of the things, though, that I discovered is part of the reason why it took me 8 months to learn that, oh my gosh, he got his ADHD from me, and I've since been diagnosed twice, was because ADHD looks so different in girls and women than it looks in boys.
ADHD is a superpower, and we've talked about that. And so I think this journey to become, as a mother, you want to become an expert in supporting your child. And so I think that's really interesting that was what got you to write a book, to have a podcast, to really become a leader and a thought leader in ADHD. What were some of the first things you thought about, and what was that next year like?
I want to qualify this by first saying that I was by no means an expert within 8 months. I knew a lot, but there was so much to learn. And I never say ADHD is a superpower because I understand that there are certain qualities or traits of ADHD which can really be a struggle for some people. Typically, it's those people with a lot of trauma because the trauma brain is actually quite similar to the ADHD brain. And so if you have trauma on top of ADHD, those are, I'm going to say women because that's who I work with. Those are the women who struggle the most. But I do believe that there are qualities and traits of ADHD that absolutely can become your superpower. But if you told me, or if you said to me, okay, you could have all the positive traits of ADHD, but you could also have fabulous working memory, oh my gosh, I would take that in a heartbeat. You wanted to know what
What
were
was
some.
that? Yeah, what was the journey like?
So I had always been the kind of person that was always trying to figure myself out. I was all about self development, personal development. I did all of I took all the exams, I read all the books, I went to the workshops, always trying to figure out who was I and what made me tick. I'd been like that my entire life. And so when I discovered, I still remember I was on my computer. I had actually been working with a coach and it really wasn't working. And I thought, oh, it's me. I'm just not coachable. Well, now I know, no, coaching works, but you need the right coach. You need a coach that understands the ADHD brain because we are not the kind of people, if you tell us, oh, go do this, if we don't understand why we have to do it, we are going to fight you at every turn. We are not those kind of people. And so that particular kind of coaching didn't work. But I'm sitting at my computer and all of a sudden I put two and two together. And the way I did it was I discovered I was trying to figure out my values. Again, I'm always that's just who I was. What I discovered is my number one value is to challenge the status quo. And once I got that, everything clicked. Wait, I forgot what my values are, but this is another thing with our ADHD brains. Like, I will never forget my number one value, but I'll forget all the other ones. So, living to my full potential, family, authenticity, connection, right? And those all sounded so sweet. And I'm not sweet. But once I put them under the umbrella of challenging the status quo, I was like, boom, it all came together. And that is literally the next thing was me discovering that I had ADHD. And I think that if I had not first gotten that challenging the status quo part, I wouldn't have been able to see the ADHD because, like a lot of women, we are socialized to be the good girls, to work harder than everybody else, to try so hard to. And if you've got the ambition and the drivenness, because I'm so hyperactive, I have so much energy, we are the kind of people that are constantly achieving, but we never feel like we've achieved enough. And so having that all come together under the umbrella of challenging the status quo and ADHD, it was just light bulbs and fireworks because I finally understood why I am the way I am and why I do what I do. And I hear that story from most ADHD women. And so once you can start beating yourself up about the things that you struggle with, and ADHD brains we're brains of interest. So we tend to struggle with the boring day to day, like motherhood. It's like Groundhog Day. It never ends. And thankfully, I have a husband who's a complete partner. So he took on a lot of that. But I am telling you, if it was up to me, my kids would never have eaten. I mean, and sometimes, he'd have to go to a meeting in San Jose. And so he'd be gone for, most of the day. And my kids would literally come up to me and say, Mom, I'm starving. And I'd look at my watch and I'd be like, oh my God, it's 2 o'clock and I forgot to feed my kids lunch. So it's that, monotonous day to day where, we really thrive when we're doing something fun, when we're doing something challenging, when we're doing something social, when we're doing something new. and when there's fear and we got to get things done. But that's not a way, that's not the right way to live. So it's those day-to-day boring tasks like making sure the house is straightened. Not everybody's like that. And I am not. This is not, I've almost developed this anxiety around if my external surroundings are a mess, my brain can't function. So I can be very neurotic about making sure that everything around me is perfect so that I'm not dealing with all that visual pollution and I can actually get to my work. But it's things like straightening the house. It's things like paying bills. It's things like keeping the car clean and making sure, you get the oil changes. It's things like going to the doctor. It is those everyday things that most people can do that just bore us to tears. We want to do the really hard stuff that we're interested in, and that is where we excel.
So that must have been like pretty eye-opening when you first discovered that. Like, how did you feel, Tracy? That's what I want to know. How did you feel when you learned that?
Well, I remember literally slamming the desk, and it was this kind of like, that's it. Oh my gosh. And then I was like, I wanted to learn more about it, right? That is how our brains work. So I started a Facebook group, and people were coming in right and left because obviously there were other women that wanted to be part of a Facebook group that learn together. That was my whole intention. I want to learn with people. A couple months after that, I started a podcast, and I was literally learning with the listeners. So I would take a subject every week and I would just explore it, and I would do research, and I would get the science behind it, and then I would teach it. And that's the best way, we excel and learn at anything, right? Is by teaching. And so it was right before COVID. I guess my timing was right. Everybody was learning about ADHD on social media. And so they wanted to know more. And that is how everything sort of blew up.
In the process of that, of everything blowing up, so you took this interest. How is your son, Marcus? How has his journey been? Like once discovering it and going through that, and also as like a mother-son duo, because when you do have that experience and your child does, there's a parallelism in existence as you're moving along with this newfound knowledge.
He really struggled in high school. He went to 3 high schools in 4 years, never socially. It was always the teaching. And I have often said to him and other people that I feel like my son was the arbiter of good teaching. So if you have a child, or if you can relate to this in yourself, where there were certain subjects that you struggled with every teacher, like for example, me, hated math. I didn't do that bad in math, but it was B's, B pluses, and I just hated it. And then I remember having one class in trigonometry, and I got the highest grade in the class. I got an A plus. And I had been telling myself, like Barbie all along, I suck at math. I'm like Barbie. I can't do math. No, it was the teaching. And so if you have a child where you feel like there's certain classes that they shouldn't do well in that class because they've never done well in that subject, but they take, that class and they just blow it out of the park. To me, that is a sign of ADHD. The other thing is if you have a child who there are certain subjects where they are just so interested in them, that's another kind of a red flag. You don't have the kind of child that just does well across the board. Maybe they do really poorly in everything else, but they're so highly creative because that's one of our biggest traits. And creativity is not just creativity in terms of, design and music and art and dance. Creativity can also be creativity of thought because what goes on with the ADHD brain is there are so many, it's like popcorn. There are so many thoughts popping up all over the place that we can get really distracted from, the things we're supposed to do because we have all these thoughts. But the brilliance of all these thoughts is we also are able to make all these connections that your neurotypical, normal, average brain won't make. So my son, and I did my ADHD segue, and I'm going to stick to the point now. He really struggled in high school, and it was because of poor teaching. He got himself into trouble. He was playing football. He had a horrible football coach. He really struggled. So he went from that school to, it was a private school, and he had all kinds of friends at the big public. I think there were 2,700 kids in the school, and he had come from, always these small little schools. So he struggled there. He struggled at the second school because they promised to teach to interest and they did not at all. It was the same old thing, just it was expensive and the class sizes were so incredibly small. Of his junior year, we just looked at him and we said, and he was depressed. We looked at him and we said to him, you may choose whatever school you want to go to. We don't care. All we care is that you're happy and you're smiling. So you know what he did? He went back to the Catholic high school. He killed it. It was that. And then that summer, he went to go visit. He went to Germany and he stayed there for the summer with an exchange student that we had hosted when that kid was 15. And he traveled. My son loves to travel. He traveled all over Europe by himself at 17. And he got off the plane. He did not want to go to college. He thought education was a boondoggle. There was nothing we could say. He was not going to college. And I was like, okay, as long as you're doing something, I'm not going to care. I just want you to be happy. He got off the plane. He said, I'm going to college. He had not done the ACTs, the SATs. He didn't have a college counselor. He didn't have anything. And literally within 2 months, he was also a rapper. I forgot to tell you this. And an audio engineer, and he had taught himself. So what he ended up doing is in 2 months, he took the ACT. He did not want a college counselor. He decided to go on his own to research all the colleges, and he did such an incredible job that the college counselor at his school told us that he was giving her advice on smaller, kind of more liberal arts colleges that she didn't really even know about. And he applied early decision to NYU. Did a portfolio on social justice rap. He's a quarter Japanese. And he did it on Korematsu, the Korematsu decision. He got in early decision to NYU.
That's amazing.
Which is insane because he did not have the grades. He had really good grades his senior year, but he had, poor grades all the way through. And his ACT score was not great. I mean, considering he didn't do any testing, he just went in and took, and he's studying for it. He just went in and took it. It was solid, but he did not do what my daughter did, which is, what we're supposed to do. Now, once he got into college, he went through 3 majors in 4 years as well. Graduated in 4 years. We still don't know how. Again, he started out in this, he was at Tisch, started out in this music major. But it was a lot of writing, and it was about social justice and using the arts. He did really well in that, but wasn't interested. So he ended up applying to their economics program. Like me, he's all about business and building businesses. That's his forte. His math preparation from high school was so bad that he really struggled. And then we discovered he also had dyslexia. So there was something about the numbers and the letters and math. And again, ADHD brain, he could get you the answer, but he couldn't show you his work. So he ended up changing majors again to sociology. Yeah. Oh my God. That's which, okay. Again, I thought sociology, what kind of major is that? How do you get a job? He is killing it to the point where, and it's a sales position, working with scientists, doctors, and lawyers. He has done so well since October that he's their rookie of the year already, and he's going to Switzerland to ski in the Alps in March. So, they just, his boss ended up leaving, and he took over the whole desk and had literally just started at the company. But he's able to talk to people all over the world. He's able to learn about patents and medications. And, it's interesting work for him. So he is finally thriving. And my whole reason for reciting that story is simply to say, if you have a child who is in that, teenage range, just know it gets better and better as long as they are able to focus in an area of interest.
Think that as parents to recognize that, because we are so trained, it's ingrained in us. Society ingrains it in us, our families do, what we come from, and then of course the system to go 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 and achieve and be and have these pressures that there's a certain way, but life isn't linear, and if you have an
Yeah.
ADHD brain, you have to think differently, so you have to be in spaces that appreciate the way you think. And I think that's a huge thing for you to do, because it's not an easy thing to sort of let go and let things unfold, and giving him permission to figure it out. So I'd like for you to talk about the nonlinear aspect of ADHD. Describe a little bit the nonlinear aspect when you recognize that as someone with ADHD, and how you sort of approach life.
I think I've always approached life like that. I mean, if you think about, if my number one value is to challenge the status quo, I am always trying to get out of the line. And I've always been like that. And I think because of that, we can be annoying, you know, to the people who want to keep everything in the box and want to keep everything the same. We are change makers and we're always trying to make things better. And from the time we're little kids, we're the ones that are asking why. The teacher wants us to just sit down, be quiet, stop talking, or pay attention, because one of the things I need to mention is all we ever hear about is that hyperactive kind of little boy form of ADHD. But there is also an inattentive form of ADHD, and women tend to be twice as much inattention as boys and men, which looks like that little girl that's sitting in the back of the classroom and she's daydreaming and she doesn't even realize she's in school, let alone what class, let alone what lesson they're on, until the teacher calls her name and she's like, and she can't pay attention because her brain is constantly moving. So the hyperactivity is actually internal instead of external. Now, most of us have combined type. We have a little bit of both of them, but there are girls and some boys where they are quiet. They're not talking all the time. They're not, causing problems. They're not climbing the walls. They look like really good kids. And those are the kids that nobody even pays attention. They just sort of feel like, oh, well, that person must not be very smart, when in fact, that's not true at all. So these are the kids that end up going home and trying to teach themselves, the lessons so that they can do the homework and they can study because they could not pay attention in class.
I'm curious, this is Women's March for Mental Wellness. How would you say, with all that you're doing around ADHD, how would you say you're marching for mental wellness?
I think that for too long, ADHD has been framed as a deficit, a disorder that needs fixing. I've never bought that. I don't buy that. By the way, there is actually a study out of Canada. No one ever talks about it. And it was a very large study that showed that 43% of people with ADHD are actually in excellent mental health. And so my job is to teach women, to show women that they're not disordered, they're just different, much like Max in a Windows driven world, who we just need a different manual. And I know that the ADHD brain comes with incredible strengths. I mean, I have literally worked with thousands of women with ADHD, and I've never met a one that wasn't truly brilliant at something. And so, what I also know is when we stop focusing on what's wrong with us and start looking at what's right, everything changes. And that's because, whatever you focus on grows, right? It doesn't matter if it's, the things that cause positive emotion or the things that cause negative emotion. So my thought is, let's focus on the things that generate positive emotion, because positive emotion actually helps us create dopamine, more dopamine in our brains, which is what we don't make enough of. So I think that shift alone of looking at the strengths of ADHD, it reduces shame, it reduces self-doubt, it gets rid of imposter syndrome. And those are the exact things that I believe crush mental wellness. Certainly for ADHD brains, but literally for every brain.
So you went through this journey, you started your podcast and the book came out. Share a little bit about that.
Well, I am not one of these authors who, and I heard from them over and over again, oh my gosh, when you finish writing a book, you are going to be such a better writer and you're going to be so proud of your book and blah, blah, blah. No, I wrote the book and I was like, this sucks, which may be an ADHD thing, right? I was so close to it. I couldn't even see it. I was like, this sucks. You're not a better writer. You're a worse writer than when you started. It took me a whole year. I mean, the book's been out about a year now. It took me a whole year to finally be proud of having written this book. I couldn't even start to consider that I might be there until my editor, I was in New York City and I'm sitting there with my editor. She's like, I'm really proud of this book. And I thought, well, wait a minute. If she's proud of it and I mean, they do hundreds of books like every year. I need to be proud of this. I couldn't quite get there though until I started to read the reviews and I started to get the DMs and the emails and the messages from women who said, this book changed my life. And that's what happened with the podcast. And so I kept thinking that while I was writing the book, if I can achieve what I achieved with the podcast, with the book, then I've done what I came to do. And so once I started to see that, then I was like, okay, I can breathe. But there's always going to be people, much less than I actually expected, but there's always going to be people, especially in this space where, it is so much about the pathology and the weaknesses. People get upset if you talk about, oh my gosh, but it has these incredible strengths because they're so mired in no. This is a disability, this is a disorder. And unfortunately, if that's what you think, you will never be able to tap into the strengths of ADHD. It's so sad because then you're in learned helplessness, right? You feel like you can't do anything. And so you do nothing. And you just look around for people to do the stuff for you, which sometimes we have to do that, but often we can figure out our own way of doing things. Just because our way doesn't look like their way, the neurotypical way, does not mean that our way of doing things isn't as legitimate.
I'm kind of curious. It would be great if you talk a little bit about neurodivergence and your thoughts around that and the definition for the audience.
I would say neurodivergence, as far as when we're talking about the brain, is just a difference in how we receive the world, see the world, learn differently. A lot of people that have a neurodivergence also have a learning challenge. And it's not that they can't learn, it's that they learn differently. And I can't imagine a world where we're all the same. And especially with ADHD, which imparts so much creativity, I really believe that we are the ones that move society forward. I can promise you that a neurotypical brain did not invent the wheel, you know? Okay, I'm going to take this metal thing or this wood thing and I'm going to make it in a circle and I'm going to put four of them under, a fly. We are the ones and scientists even say that our main strength is ideation. And ideas are what change our world and make it better.
It's just such a fresh conversation for me because you can live in your ADHD brain and do your things. And I think to the point of ideation, living in that space, that idea space versus the small stuff space is a really pretty cool space to live in. It's interesting. Your book's been out. It's hugely successful. You're changing women's lives in terms of really helping them reframe how they think of themselves. How are you seeing like your life evolving in this space?
Well, even in the ADHD space, I am not your traditional ADHD coach. I do not do tips and tricks coaching because I frankly, I can't keep up with them and I don't believe in them. What I do is foundational work. I really believe that if you are on the highest tree, who gives a damn if you're in the wrong forest? And I think so many women are working so hard in an area that they were told they should be in because it pays really well or it has prestige, or I don't know, their parents were the ones who said, this is what we think you should do. And I think that that is actually what breeds pathology, not being able to live to your potential, not being who you really are. And so my whole premise is I do the foundational work. I work with women on answering the questions of who are they really? What do they value? What are their strengths? What are their passions, talents, and skills that they built into superpowers? And then where is their purpose? And then the sweet spot where all that meets, that is the area that we should be focusing on. Because the other problem with the ADHD brain is we can be all over the place. We have so many interests and we're constantly getting diverted from one place to another. And that is because we are not operating in that sweet spot. That sweet spot is where our interest is going to be. And so I created a patented program that literally walks them through the end where they finally know who they really are and they know what they should be doing with their life. And then the tips and tricks matter less because the goal is then you are focusing 95% of your efforts in that area of interest, in that sweet spot. And then you're farming out the other things because you're so successful in that sweet spot. We learn better, learn faster than neurotypical brains. And then you can look at, okay, so I don't want to have a messy desk. What are the things that have worked for me in the past? And what are the small steps that I can implement every day that generates that it's fun, it's challenging, it's social? Like those are the questions we ask. So they always have a template around, they know who they are. Then we build this template around, okay, when you need to get those things done that society says you have to get done. I mean, you got to pay your bills. How are we going to hack this? And then it's a way that works for us instead of, I'm just thinking right now, the way neurotypicals are taught to manage their finances, like that's never going to work for us. And so what are the strategies that actually will work for you? And the thing is, if you do just a little bit, that's going to generate positive emotion. Positive emotion generates dopamine. So you're much more likely to then do the next step and the step after that. And so it's kind of like an airplane runway where, you're doing those little things. Like first thing, I don't know about you, but I cannot sit at my desk and I can't eat that frog. I can't do the hardest thing, but I can do a bunch of little things that kind of ramp up the dopamine and then they get my plane off the ground. So then about 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, I can start doing the things that I really need to get done that are a real struggle for me.
I'm curious if there's anything else you want to share, Tracy, before we get into closing.
I guess what I would say is, and this is for everyone, ADHD or not, you are the expert on you. Do not abdicate your mental health to anyone. Doctors do not know more than you about what works for you. And the simple reason, I mean, they may know all the medical stuff, right? But bottom line, you're the only one that has that rudder inside yourself. You're the only one that has access to what actually makes you feel good. And I think what happens is so many of us, we go into the doctors, okay, this is the medicine that, I'm going to prescribe, and let's say mental health, right? For ADHD, because this was my story. And I'm not against medication. What a lot of women will do, they'll be prescribed medication, whether it's for anxiety, depression, or ADHD. They start taking it and they feel worse and worse. But because the doctor said this is what you should take, they keep taking it and they literally lose track and sight of what it actually feels like to feel good. So your doctor doesn't have access to that rudder, that thermometer inside you that tells you, okay, I'm feeling positive emotion versus negative emotion. So I've met so many women that were on anxiety medication or depression medication for decades. and it never got better. And then lo and behold, they discover that, oh, wait, it wasn't actually anxiety and depression at all, or underlay it all was ADHD. And so when you treat the ADHD, the anxiety and depression also resolve, or at a minimum, get so much better. But the doctor said that this is what I should do, right? And if you've been doing this for decades, you don't even remember what feeling good felt like.
This conversation could go on forever. I'm enjoying it so much, and I think it's wonderful for the audience to hear your story and, of course, your expertise. This is your platform today to give a message to women of all ages, of all backgrounds, of all cultures. Tracy, what do you want to leave them with?
I don't care who you are. Focus on your strengths, not your weaknesses. I mean, if you think about it, has anybody moved society, moved the world, achieved greatness in their weaknesses? No. Focus on your strengths because that's where all the positive emotion is. That's where the dopamine and the motivation and everything you need to be successful are. But I think as a society, certainly in school, it's always about like trying to get better at what you just naturally are not good at. And I think that's the wrong message. I think, especially with kids, look at what your kids are brilliant at and shore that up. Make sure that they're doing more in that area. If you're fighting them to, I don't know, go to martial arts or dance, find out what it is that you don't have to fight them to do, because that's much closer to who they really are. And I think when kids discover and develop who they really are, that's what breeds confidence and allows them to, I guess, then finally share their gifts with us instead of constantly fighting themselves and everyone else because they think that, oh, that's what they should be doing.
You're right. The strengths are what change the world.
Get under the hood and find your strengths.
It's a metaphor, if you will. But anyway, it has been wonderful getting under the hood with you. Thank you so much for your time today, but more importantly, for exposing and getting under the hood of ADHD and becoming the leader you are in this space. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Under the Sisterhood. If you haven't already, please give us a quick rating and review on Apple or Spotify. And make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn so you can hear from more amazing women. This podcast is created and hosted by Under the Sisterhood LLC and Elizabeth Elfenbein, produced by Elizabeth Elfenbein and Matt Butler, and edited by Matt Butler. The music is by Ayla Schaefer. Her song, Rose.